Welcome everyone to another edition of Play It Through, and on this edition it's Ghosts N Goblins, brought to us by Capcom. Ghosts N Goblins is one of the most notoriously difficult NES games for a fair amount of reasons, being originally released in arcades in 1985 before being ported over to NES and Famicom in 1986, and it's been frustrating gamers, including myself, ever since. So here we go with Ghosts N Goblins for the NES. As we begin the game, you'll see a small cutscene with the princess being taken away before Sir Arthur jumps into his set of armor and we begin the first level. The basic controls of Ghosts N Goblins are simple enough. You're able to jump and you're able to fire out your weapon. Arthur controls pretty stiff. It's something that you have to get used to pretty quickly. The one thing though that Arthur is able to do is turn directions in mid-air. This is extremely useful as you can jump one direction, quickly turn around, and fire in the opposite. This actually is a great strategy for dealing with many of the game's bosses, and a technique I'll be using a lot, especially during the second run of the game. And yep, this is one of those games you have to beat it twice in order to see the good ending. This is a great way for them to get as many quarters as possible out of gamers' pockets, and that's exactly what Ghosts N Goblins was built for, that arcade style. When it got moved over to the NES, at least they allowed you to continue as many times as you like, so it encourages you to at least keep trying and not exactly give up like you would in a lot of other games where you only have a limited number of lives. Learning the enemies and their potential patterns is also a big key to surviving in this game. You'll notice a lot of times, like with these enemies here, I just keep moving. The key to surviving in a lot of the levels of Ghosts N Goblins is to not stop. Just make sure that you're able to keep a nice flow to your movement and only stop on enemies that you know are going to be a problem. So the gargoyle-like enemies, the red armors, are one of the enemies that usually I have to deal with before I'm able to progress. After defeating the first boss, we grab the key, and that automatically opens up the gate and allows us to move on to the next level. You have to grab that key in order to progress, so you do have to defeat the bosses in order to move on. As we begin level number 2, we're going to quickly jump up these platforms, avoiding the demons, and just keep moving. Just keep moving and jumping when you need to, only avoiding a projectile or two usually before you end up making it to the end. When you make it to the falling platform, do a couple of steps on it and then the jump. If you jump too soon, you'll end up missing. This is where things get tricky though. When we make it to this house, we're going to wait a moment for an enemy to spawn. It's going to spawn from one of the windows. It's not always guaranteed which one. You don't want to hesitate for too long or else you'll end up missing the opportunity, but basically that little bit of a wait allows that troll on the bottom level to get a little bit to the right so that we can make it to this first ladder. Then getting up here is difficult for sure. My main strategy is to make sure that the troll on the third level is to the left of the ladder that I just climbed up a second ago. That at least gives me enough of a gap to jump over the one troll and get over. Don't bother fighting him. Now we're going to use one of two little glitch spots in the game that really help out. Using this bird, you can actually jump on its head and get knocked over that little tower, and that saves not only a lot of time, but saves a ton of headache. Honestly, one of the most difficult spots in this entire game is getting down those ladders without using that glitch. In fact, most times I don't end up making it. So, we have to sacrifice health here, but it'll end up paying off in the end as we should be able to make it through. The next little segments, there's a couple of enemies, but mostly you're just waiting for the platforms. Don't risk it, wait for the right time, and then jump over the gaps. Jumping in the game is finicky to begin with, so it may take you a time or two to get used to it. Now, as soon as we see this enemy, we're going to immediately fire at him, and he'll do one of two things. Either start coming towards us, or usually he'll jump over us. And when he does that, we're going to start going the opposite direction, turning around and facing him, and firing projectiles. One thing I've noticed with them is if you face them and start firing at them, the chances of them going the opposite direction away from you again is more likely than trying to just run away from them, as they'll usually just plow you over, since you're not giving them any kind of threat. Your button presses dictate the AI, so when you fire out your weapon to a long-distance enemy, its reaction is to start moving and dodge. That's why Firebrand or the red armor enemies, they don't end up moving until you get close to them, or if you fire at them from a distance, and then all of a sudden they'll start flying around. At the beginning of level 3, we're going to make a short jump and then immediately duck. This allows all the bats to go over us, gives us a second to take out all of the zombies. The next segment, go up and down a couple of ladders, avoiding a few of these spiky enemies that fire out projectiles. You do have to take out those guys, though, as you progress. There's only a few of them that we have to actually battle, but you will need to destroy them. You can't jump over them. This level is relatively tough as you have to deal with a few of the red armors, including this guy here and a couple other ones. You are sometimes able to trick them enough to either go off screen, or if you move fast enough up the staircase-like platforms fast enough, you can get them to go away, but more often than not, it's best to just deal with the red armors. Here's a good example of how they are just completely relentless. I get past this red armor. He disappears off screen, but he's not despawned. He ends up reappearing right here just a second later, and I still end up having to deal with him. So, with the red armors, it's usually best to deal with them, because the enemies in the game are seemingly built to chase you. As you're climbing upwards, going up ladders, they are able to keep up and keep chasing you down, respawning where you are, but when you head downwards, like we are right here, they aren't able to keep up. So finally, we're able to get past at least a couple of them. On the bottom level here, we're going to end up grabbing the torch. There's a few weapons in the game. The best weapon is the knife, and that's only because it's very, very fast, and you're able to get out a lot of them quickly. The torch, not so great. If you miss an attack, it ends up burning on the ground for a few seconds, and you're not able to get out a projectile again. But it is relatively powerful, so we're going to use it here against this dragon, as we at least get rid of the javelin. There's only a couple of weapons in the game. You need the shield weapon in order to defeat the final boss, so thankfully they give you that, but it's really not a good weapon for anything else other than that boss encounter. So usually I end up having the javelin and the torch for my first run, get the shield at the end of the first run, and then switch over to the knife for all of the second run until the final boss again. Level number 4 is an interesting one as we begin with these moving platforms. It's a bit tricky to kind of jump between them, but you'll get it down relatively quick. It's actually one of the easier segments as far as difficult platforming in this game goes. At the end of the area, though, we do have a red armor waiting for us. Take him out before you end up continuing through the area. He's just going to become more of a pain later on, and we have other red armors that we're going to have to deal with during this. This is another segment of the game where walking is your best friend. Just keep on moving. Occasionally, an enemy will give you a bad run and start coming towards you. Quickly turn around and fire at it, but make sure that that enemy is definitely going to hit you before you end up wasting that precious second turning around and trying to fire at it. At the end of the area, though, there is another red armor that we're going to have to deal with. Do a nice little backwards jump and fire, and we're able to deal with that one. Take out any other enemies before then going to the dragon. These dragons are pretty simple, but the main thing is you have to defeat them quickly. And the reason why is after the third cycle of them moving back and forth, they dive downwards every time. The longer their tail, the easier it is to hit you. So make sure that you've destroyed enough of the tail or defeat them totally before they end up coming down, because it's very hard to try to jump over them. The overall challenge of the game really ramps up in levels 5 and 6. Not only the increased difficult enemies, but also plenty of boss and semi-boss encounters, like the red armors and even other bosses making appearances throughout the levels. We're going to start off by going across the bottom, and then go up a couple of ladders, deal with a few enemies. Any of those little flying guys that shoot out those red pellets or red fireballs, try to deal with them if you can. The flying ghost-like spirit guys that fire out the spears, you usually can just skip by walking underneath of them. Now, next up, we have another red armor. I usually skip this guy. I accidentally fired out a projectile without thinking, so I had to end up dealing with him. The second run, though, we're just going to ignore him. So, on your first run, just ignore him. We then have more of those big men enemies, or the troll ogre guys from level 2. These guys, once again, huge pain. They fire out projectiles, which I've noticed if you do jumps away from them, they will never fire. Don't do any steps, don't step away from them, but if you consistently just do jumps away from them, they'll never fire out their projectile, which is interesting enough. You can also increase their speed of walk by firing out projectile shots at them in order to give them that quick boost so that you can then make a jump over them. That's just one of the ways to deal with them. Thankfully, though, the game gives us a nice little prize there, as I'm able to get a hit, go past a couple of trolls, deal with one of them at the top, that one big guy at the top, and then I get an armor right after that, so that really ends up helping. Then we climb up a series of ladders to deal with the boss for level 5, which is known as Satan. Yep, this guy is actually Satan. Either way, with these gliding, flying guys, the best strategy for them, of course, is they can't actually get hurt when they're kind of protecting themselves, so you can only attack them when they're open and kind of floating. When they do their dives down, if you duck, they'll just go over top of you. The first guy one-on-one isn't too bad. The second time we have to deal with these guys in level 6, there's 2 of them, so kind of get a nice little strategy or learn their pattern in level 5 before even attempting to move on to level 6. Now, level 6 is pretty much a gauntlet of boss encounters. As we deal with the first level boss, the unicorn guy here, take him out before going up the ladder. Thankfully, he'll usually stay to the left side, just kind of jump, keep facing him, don't run away from him, just keep facing him, firing those projectiles, and hopefully he goes down quickly. Right after that, though, we have to deal with a dragon. Stay on this platform, and when the dragon comes down towards you, a lot of its body gets stuck on the top floor. Number 1, that's a big help. He'll also end up causing the shield item to end up dropping, so grab the shield weapon whenever you want to, finish off the dragon before then going up the ladders. Now we're going to use a trick to help us get past the next segment. We're going to use this red armor, which takes a bit of getting used to, manipulating him in order to go on the left side and then get hit when facing the opposite direction, moves us up the wall, and allows us to jump up, skipping a large portion of those enemies. We then have to deal with the 2 Satans at the very top. Don't worry, we have to do this again so I can explain it a bit better that second time around. One strategy for the Satans is to kind of get them both to attack initially so that they're both on the left side of the screen, then quickly rush to the right side of the screen, do a jump so that when the Satans come in, they're a little elevated. You don't want them too close to you or too close to the bottom, and then you can do jumping attacks. Once one Satan is down, it's easy to see when the projectiles of the other one are coming out, so you'll hopefully be able to dodge them, finish him off, and then be able to move on to the boss of the game, known as Astaroth. Now, this is a very easy boss in comparison. He's unable to even do anything other than move back and forth left and right, firing the occasional fireball out of one of his 2 mouths. Just keep throwing those shields, and then you get the unfortunate bad ending when you do end up defeating him. We then get sent back to level number 1 to do things all over again. We do keep the shield weapon, though, which is unfortunate, but we're going to get another weapon pretty early on here in level 1 of our second playthrough. Thankfully, right at the beginning of the first level, when you go through this segment here, you will get a zombie to spawn with a pot, destroy it, and you'll get the knife. Now that we have the knife, this will greatly end up helping us out as far as being able to deal with most enemies, including even tougher enemies in the game, as we're able to fire out so many projectiles so quickly, it makes defeating things a lot easier, including things like the red armors. That backwards jump and firing of the knife is extremely effective for dealing with them and most enemies. When dealing with the flying armor guys, you can take them out if you want, though. As you noticed in my first run and this one, the best strategy is to kind of get past that first one and then duck, and that way the other ones will just kind of float over your head. For all this segment, we're just going to keep on rushing through, just keep moving. You can fire and jump if you want to, but you'll just end up risking getting attacked. At the end of the area, when we deal with the unicorn guy, thankfully the knives allow us to get out quite a few projectiles, and once again, just kind of keep facing him. If you have to move backwards, that's fine, but only take a few steps and then immediately turn back towards him and attack him, because this usually ends up getting him to retreat a little bit, allowing you to have that extra much-needed space to survive any encounter against those unicorn guys. Once again, in level 2, immediately start jumping up all of the platforms. You may occasionally have to jump over one of the projectiles coming your way before we make it to the end of this segment. Once again, take a couple of steps on the platform that's falling, and then make your jump. Like last time, we're going to wait at this building for one of the guys to spawn, one of the ghost-like demon guys, and this gives me enough time to kind of keep on moving, knowing that that troll or big man at the bottom has moved a bit. Now, thankfully with the knife, I have a bit of a better strategy. That troll or big man is too far to the right for me to have to deal with jumping over him, so attacking him from afar with a knife allows me to defeat him and then go all the way over to the right here and then up these ladders. So much easier the second time around using that knife, but still you can use the same strategy of kind of baiting them over and then jumping through that whole segment if you want to. But you want to make sure that you survive enough with your armor so you're able to do the trick and get over that wall, which will save you so much of a headache and time. Once again, thankfully, the rest of the level is pretty simple. Just have them moving up and down platforms. They move very sporadically and annoyingly. Sometimes you have to wait an extra few seconds, but at least it's a pretty simple segment. One thing that's also a big pain in Ghosts N Goblins is the time limit, which is another reason why I've always said that moving is your best friend. It's a pretty strict time limit, and there's also items that you can end up grabbing that decrease your time as well, so because of that, it's even more annoying. Dealing with the two unicorn bosses here, running away and then turning around after a few steps in order to fire at him is once again a good strategy to at least get the unicorn to back off a little bit so that he doesn't end up bowling you over and end up making you lose a life. Once again, at the beginning of level 3, do a jump if you want to, or just duck immediately. Either way, whatever you want to do. Get those bats to start flying, and they'll just fly over your head once you're ducking. Be careful when dealing with the zombies at the bottom of this ladder that you don't accidentally end up grabbing that javelin. If the javelin's right in front of the ladder, just jump over it and then keep going to the next ladder. Just ignore that first one. It's better to make sure that you keep the knife than accidentally grab the wrong weapon. This time I take out the guy on the top, but you could of course just come right down that one ladder, and then you will have to deal with this one tower guy before we get to the second half of the level, or the blue half of the level. Right away, we have one of the red armors. We're going to do backwards jumps and attacks in order to easily deal with him, and then continue up the staircase-like platforms. Once again, with this red armor here, you can try to escape him if you want. This time, for me, he decides to escape himself by going off the side of the screen to the left. Now, right after I climb up these couple of ladders and start going to the right on the one, just like last time, that red armor ends up appearing, and we have to deal with him here. If you do a quick turnaround and duck an attack, you usually can kind of get him to go back up into the air the opposite direction, at least so he doesn't run into you. Like before with this guy, we can jump over him and avoid him, or thankfully with the knives, it gives me an easier opportunity to get some attacks in, so I hit him with a few knives to destroy him before heading down the platforms. We want to be extra careful on the bottom here. I'm going to avoid that as well. That turns you into a frog until you end up getting hit for a period of time, so not very helpful when I'm getting ready to face a boss. Thankfully though, when you're a frog, if you have armor equipped, if you get hit, you just end up going to your underwear. You're not instantly killed or anything. For level 4, immediately start jumping up the moving platforms. Just like before, it's pretty easy once you kind of get like the timing of it and know which ones you're going to be jumping to. It's always the same, they don't change up patterns or anything. You can drop down and get an extra life if you want to do that. Over here, we're going to jump over the red armor, deal with this guy. Make sure, like before, you want to take him out before going to the bridge, because it'll just be a lot easier. When on this fire bridge, just keep moving. Don't want to stop. Only turn around if you absolutely have to, and same really goes for jumping. I like to jump over those fire towers, because sometimes you'll still end up getting clipped by enemies around there. They like to kind of pop out at the same time as the fire, making them difficult to see. So usually you'll notice I jump around those towers, but unfortunately I'm not able to avoid all the enemies. I get hit. Thankfully, it's just that dragon, though, so he's relatively easy with knives to take out before moving on to level number 5. The game's also generous that it gives you your armor back at the end of a level, so every time you beat a level, at least you have that one hit point left. The game would be even more of a nuisance if you didn't get any health back whatsoever. Like last time at level 5, we're going to start off by heading on to the far right side. I recommend taking out the skeleton guys on the bottom, the zombie guys, before continuing to that right side. Just don't want them jumping up right at you when you're also dealing with a few of the other enemy types during the stage. Watch out for the axe. We're going to avoid that. We're going to ignore this red armor. Like last time I fought him. Thankfully this time I was smart enough not to attack him. When we climb up this ladder, take out the first big guy on the bottom. That gives you an easy opportunity to go up the next couple. If you end up getting hit or whatever, if you don't end up surviving, it's cool. You'll get that extra armor right after this segment. So you'll usually only have to deal with the one big guy on that top platform. And like I said, if you get hit, not a big deal. You get a free suit of armor right across that gap. Nothing changes up in the levels as far as when you're replaying them, really, so just have to make your way around this area, go up a couple of ladders, and we get our rematch against Satan here at the top. When we get up here, we're going to immediately do a jump attack at Satan and then jump the opposite direction. You can do kind of backwards jumps and attacks, or duck under him when he does that glide, so you're able to avoid his attack. As we begin level 6, take out a couple of enemies if you need to at the bottom screen before going up the ladder. Deal with the unicorn guy on the left side. Don't move up the next ladder or attempt to move it up until you end up destroying them. Just like last time with the dragon, you're going to want him to start attacking you while you're on the platform below. This gives you an opportunity to hopefully get some of his body to stay on the top level. Either way, once he's defeated, make sure that you grab that shield weapon, as we're going to need it to defeat the boss, of course, of the game. Now, this is where things, again, are really hard. We're going to use the red armor on this left side. By getting hit, we can get him to knock us backwards into the wall. You want to be a little bit away from the wall, though. This will give you just enough space so that when you get hit, you land on top of it, instead of getting knocked off of this pillar and all the way down to the very bottom and beginning of the level. The level's not that long either, so if you do end up failing this attempt, you don't have to wait too long to get another one. I recommend taking out the red armor, that first one, if you can before start jumping up the wall, and that way the second red armor you deal with at the top won't be as hard. With the double Satan battle at the top, once again, duck in front of them right where they are. They'll kind of glide over top of you, go to the left side of the screen, then run quickly into the wall, doing kind of a couple of jumps, get them stuck in that wall in order to finish him off and move on to the final boss encounter. Now this boss is identical to the last one. All he's going to do is move back and forth, always facing you and just firing out projectiles every so often. It's better to be safe than sorry. Keep your distance if you need to a little bit, so that way you have ample opportunity to jump and avoid any of the fireballs that he ends up dishing out. Once you are able to deliver that final blow, though, you get to sit back and enjoy the ending to Ghosts N Goblins. And that's it. The game goes to a game over screen and then back to the main menu where you can start things all over again. But at least it was a happy end, right? But anyway, guys, it's going to wrap up this episode of Play It Through. I'd like to thank you for watching, and of course, I hope you enjoyed.